Well, welcome everybody. I'm Jeff Finkel, CEO of the Arcview Group, and I'm really excited to welcome you to our California Town Hall to discuss the business dynamics of the cannabis industry in the Golden State. This is our 11th Town Hall. We program New Jersey, Colorado, New York, Michigan, Massachusetts, and Illinois, just to name a few. And we expect to be going international soon with a Mexico Town Hall over the next few months. Our Town Hall webinars are a key part of our digital programming, as its content is very useful for local operators, investors, and business hopefuls in the region of focus. Now, suffice to say, California has not lived up to its promise. Our panelists today will talk about the continuing presence of the illicit market enabled by enforcement priorities and unfavorable tax policies. Now, there's been some recent pressure applied by industry leaders to do something about it, some of whom are on this panel today. But is state government listening? We'll see. Our panelists will also talk about the creation through consolidation of State House Holdings, which I believe is now California's largest operator. So yeah, I'm really excited about today's program. We have great panelists, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. But before we start, let me introduce you, or reintroduce you as the case may be, to the Arcview Group, which has evolved quite a bit over the last 2 years, as has this industry and many of you, our viewers. The Arcview Group is a financial services firm that leverages its programming, content, and thought leadership in the cannabis, psychedelic, and industrial hemp industries to drive business to its 3 subsidiaries. Arcview Capital, our FINRA licensed broker-dealer, which provides investment banking services and is soon launching their crowdfunding offering. Arcview Ventures, our principal investing group and operator of the Arcview Collective Fund, a member-managed venture capital fund with 78 active limited partner members. It's a committed capital fund where members make the decisions. And Arcview Management Consulting, our consulting group, which offers cannabis license pursuit and other growth management services. We also operate the WIN program, the Women's Inclusion Network, which provides a platform for women in the industry to network, collaborate, and support each other in participating in the industry. It's an amazing program run by an amazing group of folks here at Arcview. Again, all of this is supported by our thought leadership, our digital programming. Now, in addition to this town hall series, our digital programming also includes our broader Arcview Access events and our fireside chats themed to cover a variety of topics germane to these industries. And rounding out the digital programming is our CEO Circles and Tales from the Top, in which we get to hear the challenges endured by many great C-suite executives and battle-hardened entrepreneurs. And we will soon produce a number of live events and themed salon events and VIP dinners. And we're soon going to make an exciting announcement about our broader live event strategy, so stay tuned. All of this programming is made possible by our alliance partners. Let me thank Zubra Lawler, who will be participating in today's panel, Dwayne Morris, Green Growth CPA, Alpha Root Insurance, GrowFlow, Work, Ice Miller, Transact First, Waterton Partners, and North Star Financial Consulting Group. All right, let me just give you a quick overview of some upcoming events. Monday, January 24th, 2 p.m. Pacific time, 5 p.m. Eastern time, WIN Mentorship Workshop, the importance of experiential marketing and growing your brand in 2022. That will be with House of Puff and the Stone Age. Thursday, January 27th, 1 p.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Eastern time, Arcview Access, how to become acquisition ready. Monday, February 7th, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, WIN Mentorship Program, Risk Mitigation and How to Avoid Risk with Trust, with Trace Trust. Thursday, February 10th, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, Special Edition Arcview Access, MCBA National Cannabis Equity Report and Toolkit. So please check your emails for information about these and other upcoming programs. All right, let's move on with the program, and it's a good one. Our events team have put together a great panel to talk about the difficulties facing the state of California. Let's learn together And so with that, let me hand it over to our moderator, Sarah Falbo, Managing Director of Business Development for Arcview Consulting. Take it away, Sarah.
Thank you, Jeff, and new year, new role for me. So I'm very excited about that. So there's a poll that's going to pop up. We'd love for you to just give us your input, and then we can kick off the show. So on the surface, for some time, California has seemed to be the golden child of what the cannabis industry could look like. Tons of great brands, flower that is some of the top in the country, and a trajectory that seemed to be on the fast track to becoming a model for other states. However, the reality is that since adult use was passed in California with Prop 64 in 2016, cannabis companies have struggled to survive, much less turn a profit, while the state has raked in billions of dollars and the promise of an equitable industry has gone by the wayside. As a result of the heavy tax burden and some of the strictest compliance regulations in the US, California cannabis companies are throwing in the towel at an alarming rate. Although Governor Newsom signaled that he is open to rethinking taxes at the state level, there is still a lot of work to be done because the regulations were created by the initiative process. They can only be changed by another vote of the people or a 2/3 vote of the legislature. At the end of the day, politicians and regulators have a duty to make sure that the legal cannabis industry does not fail. And coincidentally, there was a rally earlier today at the Capitol in Sacramento with another one scheduled for January 26th. The industry needs and wants to be heard. So with that said, I am so thrilled to introduce our panelists today who come from all different verticals of the industry. We have Dashida Dawson, Matt Hawkins, Mikey Steinmetz, and Tom Zuber joining us today. And I'd love to give you a little background about each of those folks. So Dashida Dawson is a global cannabis advocate, award-winning Fortune 100 business strategist, and best-selling author of How to Succeed in the Cannabis Industry. She has nearly 20 years of business development, strategic management, and brand marketing excellence while leading dynamic teams for United Way, Target, and Victoria's Secret. Over 5 years ago, she transitioned into the legal cannabis industry as a senior executive consultant, strategy expert, and thought leader for multiple businesses, municipalities, and media outlets across the US and abroad. Currently, Dashida is the Portland Cannabis Manager, overseeing all regulatory, licensing, compliance, and equity initiatives for the city's legal industry. She is co-founder and chief strategist of Cannabis Health Equity Movement, CHEM, and serves as board chair of the National Cannabis Regulators of Color Coalition. Along with her sisters, Amani and Ice Dawson, she is co-founder of Cannabis Education Advocacy Symposium and Expo. That's a mouthful. A Brooklyn-based nonprofit educating communities across the country about the myriad of opportunities in the cannabis industry. Dashida received her MBA from Rutgers Business School and earned a degree in molecular biology from Princeton University. Next, we have Tom Zuber. He's the founder and the managing partner of Zuber Lawler Law Firm. Tom is the relationship partner for some 10 Fortune 500 company clients of the firm, as well as funds and government entities. He has also represented leading cannabis companies for over 12 years. Zuber Lawler, as a firm, manages the highest stakes matters of a large percentage of the biggest brands in global cannabis. Tom is also a founder of the international cannabis consulting company Global Go and earned a JD degree from Columbia Law School, a master's in public policy degree from Harvard University, and a biomedical engineering degree from Rutgers University, where he graduated with highest honors. I am being put to shame right here with all of your pedigrees, but that's why you're here. Matt Hawkins, next. He is the founder and managing partner of Entourage Effect Capital, EEC, a venture capital firm founded in 2014, which is focused specifically on investing in the legal cannabis industry. Matt is also currently chairman of the board of Harborside, which recently announced a combination with two other leading cannabis companies, Urban Leaf and Loudpack, to create a new entity, State House Holdings. Matt brings an extensive background in building large alternative investment firms and scaling the companies he invests in. Prior to EEC, Matt was partner and president of Tucson Capital Partners, a private equity firm focused on multifamily residential and self-storage assets, which he successfully exited in 2013. Additionally, Matt was principal and co-founder of Adjacent Capital, which is a private equity and specialty lending fund where he oversaw the sourcing, origination, structuring, and closing of over 60 transactions in a 3-year period. He also became a turnaround specialist through his time at Treadstone Partners and San Jacinto Partners. He is known and respected in the cannabis industry as one of the successful early investors. And last but certainly not least, Mikey Steinmetz. He is the co-founder and chief servant officer of Akerna, California's largest seller of sun-grown cannabis. Originally from Caracas, Venezuela, Mikey and his wife, filmmaker and environmental activist Flavia Casani, founded Akerna after touring Northern California's famed Emerald Triangle in 2014. Drawing on his previous experience in national food distribution systems as an entrepreneur in Venezuela, with his analysis skills honed at NASA and Merrill Lynch, Mikey's company was introduced to help farmers reach scale while preserving their culture and bringing conscious consumers an unparalleled premium sun-grown product. In February 2019, Akerna secured a record $125 million in funding, the largest raise of a U.S. privately held cannabis company to date. So we are so happy to have you all on the program today. And first things first, I'd love to start and just go through the line and have all of you say 1 to 2 sentences on what your thoughts on California cannabis industry is right now at this moment. So, Dashida, I'd love to start with you.
Well, oh my goodness. Well, my initial thoughts is right now it's a hot mess, but we predicted it years ago before Proposition 64 even passed. There have been people who have been in the industry for some time recognizing that if we don't regulate and we don't tax with parity and with equity, that the legal market would actually be suffering, and it is.
Yeah, that was great synopsis. Tom, how about you?
Great to see you always, Sarah, and hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here. I agree with Dashida. It's a hot mess. I think that's an apt term, and also with the notion that we all saw this coming. I think at least most of us did, and I think a lot of it stems from obviously the history of the industry, which was illegal up until recently, and then it was medicinal before it was recreational. And so we've still got that legacy and that inertia that I think feeds a lack of precision when it comes to compliance. And also I think that it feeds a perception issue as it relates to state and federal governments and enforcement and city governments, right? So one, we could focus on so many different components of this conversation. I think one to focus on is illicit product from the perspective of the compliant companies here in California. I think that's the issue, aside from maybe 280E itself. That's really making things difficult. And what we have here, I think, is this grayness that's really not serving the notion of getting authorities, municipal, state, federal, involved in actually clamping down on the illicit industry. We're all talking about compliance enforcement against the companies that are trying to pay their taxes and trying to be compliant. And I think we need a better balance here. So there are so many things we could focus on. But for me, aside from 280E itself, it's really, I think the illicit market here in California, we've got to do something about it, because whatever else is going on, it's very difficult to compete with a company that's not paying its taxes.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Tom. And Mikey, how about you? Your thoughts?
Thank you, Sarah. And hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. I'll keep mine brief to the one sentence that you asked, and pretty much the same narrative that's been shared already. I would call it a shit show on the brink of collapse. I think the groups today that are marching in Sacramento, Supernova Women Origins Council, have a great slogan, which is drug war 2.0. Like it says, like prohibition 2.0, and it's just like went backwards on everything else that was intended to do by Prop 64. So that's my brief summary.
That's perfect. Thank you. And Matt, how about you?
Hard to add much else other than it's one, frustrating, and two, borderline on stupidity at the state house level. There's just, I mean, anybody can look at this, whether you're a Republican, Democrat, independent, don't care, and just see how ludicrous this is. I mean, if you would just figure out the smarter way to reduce taxation and do a better job regulatorily, you're going to bring more money in at the state level. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's just the whole thing is so frustrating, and you can hear by all the tone of our voices that it really is borderline stupid. It makes you wonder how, if they're messing this up so bad. I mean, it makes you really wonder about what else is going on at the state level. You know, quite frankly, throughout our entire country, it's really frustrating.
Absolutely. And I think that's the main word too, frustrated. You know, we are all working hard towards a common goal. And myself, I live in California. I am a consumer. I'm in the industry. So, you know, these things are very, very important to me, especially. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. So let's kind of break down a couple of the things that everybody already touched upon, but Prop 64. So there were a few ideas that would be solved. That was the idea, problems that would be solved with the passing of Prop 64. And one main one would be just an easier pathway for legal operations to open up shop. And the idea is that in time, the unlicensed market would disappear, but in fact, it's exactly the opposite. So it's been recently reported that there are just under 850 licensed dispensaries in the state and nearly 3,000 unregulated ones. So I would love to hear kind of from each of you about just what that space looks like and how can we make it an easier pathway for more retail dispensaries to open up. So Matt, let's start with you because you are knee deep in the retail side of things. So what does that look like from your view?
You know, there was a good comment on this chat box, man. It's not just, I mean, it's a good point. The state is complicit in all of this and the way it was all set up. But giving the municipalities the option to opt out, I think is also a big problem. I mean, that's a tougher one because you don't want to make somebody do something that they're not really, that doesn't, isn't their cup of tea per se. But by the same token, it was passed at the state level. So why are we, even allowing this to occur? So that, again, just very frustrating. But I wish it was not set up that way because again, and you mentioned, we'll probably talk about this later, but the state of California, from a cannabis standpoint, is the laughingstock of the industry, and it's so unfortunate because it's also the largest cannabis market in the world. So until it's figured out at a very, very high level, we're going to be in this morass. And to Mikey's point, I mean, you can't go on like this forever. Just can't. That's unsustainable.
Absolutely. And Dashida, your thoughts on just the illicit market in general in California and just the size and how can we combat it?
Well, I've been saying we need to make the plug legit for about 5 years. And I think that concept has started to take hold on the East Coast, certainly. And one of the challenges with the mature markets on the West Coast, and certainly I deal with this in Oregon, is that we really led legalization with the idea that we need to stomp out the illicit market, which is very much drug war mentality. The DEA's whole purpose is to eradicate and suppress the illicit market. And I think that there's an opportunity, and certainly in California, certainly with the culture. And when there was a mass exit in 2018, when people couldn't keep up with the new regulations, there is an opportunity to do a better job integrating. And I do think it starts at the municipal level. There's a lot of, dry spots in California, which only serves the legacy market. But there's levels to it too, right? So we talk about these 3,000 dispensaries or retail spots that are not licensed. I feel like that's like in this gray area where people maybe were operating during the medical portion and then couldn't keep up with the regulations and they transitioned. But then there's the legacy market that just existed to even want us really to, as a state, look at that, making that revenue regulated. And we haven't really dealt with that too. There's cultural implications, diversity implications. And I think that's why when I say we have to regulate and create tax structures and frameworks that are dealing with parity and with equity, I'm talking about parity with a market that most of these legislators and the regulators refused to talk about until 2020 openly, right? Pretended that the supply and demand didn't exist. I think one of the biggest mistakes we made is to pretend that isn't a real economy that we have to account for as economists when we're building our forecast. It was forecasted that California would have 6,000 licensed retailers and delivery right now. And you said under about 800. Last time I checked, it was about 1,000. We are well below the forecast because we didn't take into account a real economy of supply and demand that is very functional, has some trust built into it as well, highly diverse. And the legal market doesn't look that way. It's actually trending the opposite. And so changing some of those dynamics, I think, starts to see that transition or that integration. This year, we had a campaign with Supernova, and shout out to them that they are leading a lot of this discussion on the ground and through the digital space to bring it national. But, you know, the Governor Newsom's budget last year had $89 million allocated for eradicating the illicit market, but only $15 million to support people getting into the industry, presumably people who are participating in the legacy market that could transition in. So I think, again, it is the money matters at the top level. Matt called it. I, as a former businesswoman, I'm always like, okay, we really have people running the country that don't know how to balance a budget or run a P&L, which is problematic. But it is how are we investing in ensuring that the industry is supporting transition into the legal market, because many people do want to transition. It's just the barriers are too high at this point.
Absolutely. No, that's so true. And Mikey, let's hear from you about this. I know you're on the cultivation, the brand, that end of things, but what are your views, especially, you know, in the area you're living in terms of retail outlets?
Yeah, I mean, the whole supply chain lives and dies at retail, right? That's the avenue that we get to sell our products. And the dearth of retails in the current California legal market makes it impossible for anybody to really survive. Personally, you know, we've started in 2014, and on December 31st of 2017, so a day before legalization, that was January 1st, 2018, we had raised all of the capital. We had 800 points of sale in a sea of more than 5,000 to 10,000 dispensaries. And on that day's switch, I believe in January of 2018, we had 27 retailers.
Wow.
So I went from 800 to 27 overnight with an organization that I had built to service those 800 accounts. So we've had to downsize multiple times. We've had to pivot. We've had to verticalize. It's been a nightmare to operate in California. And it's all because of bad policy. So what do we need to do to fix it? We need courage, we need leadership, and we need to all work together. The governor signaled on Monday that he's open to tax reform and open to expanding retail. And I've been working with a coalition of CEOs. It's called SaveCaliforniaCannabis.com. You can go online to read the petition to basically address the two biggest issues in California: lower taxes and increase retail. How do you go to increase the retail? You need to create both a carrot and a stick, both incentives and punishments. And our proposal to the legislature and to the state is basically any city or municipality that approved Prop 64 by a majority of the voters, basically mandate that by July 1st of this year, or by the end of this year, pick a date, you either have a program in place or you default to the state's program, because that's what your people voted for. Right now, we live in California in a current ecosystem that more than 68% of the municipalities and cities of California do not have a legal system for us, a commercial legal system for us to sell into. And 75% of the state, cities, and municipalities don't have retail. So people think it's legal in California. Only about 32% of the state is actually legal, and that is very problematic. So you force the cities that passed the proposition to actually enact the program, because it's been 4 years that they've had a chance to build it and they haven't. And then after that, you both create incentives to basically empower cities to be like, hey, for every X dispensaries that you open up, you get this much of the tax revenue, or you get X much benefits. And if you don't participate and you don't open up the retail numbers that we need you to open up, then you don't participate in the taxes that we collect. And there's gotta be real carrots and real sticks that are offered to municipalities, or else this is not going to work. And it needs to happen now. It needs to happen this year.
Absolutely. That was great. And Tom, how about you? You know, from the legal end of things, and even just talking about the opting out from the municipalities and things like that. I have a feeling they didn't quite know what they were saying when they said no.
Yeah, well, I agree with every lick of what's been said so far. And in particular, I thought Michael laid things out quite succinctly. I agree completely. The thing that makes this conversation difficult is that doing one thing really isn't going to help. So let's say you just crack down on the illicit market. Well, that's nice, but they're not going to move over to the legal market, as Dashida properly pointed out, without proper help, right? Because why would they, from their perspective, if they're not trying to be good citizens, if that's not a strong enough incentive for them, there's no real reason to, because they're just going to pay higher taxes. They've got to be compliant, and they all of a sudden their profits disappear, and they've got to pay their taxes. So it's a multi-component conversation, and I think that the word leadership was used and courage, and I think that that's right. We really need leadership that has a salespersonship capacity where they can actually sell a broader vision, and the broader vision has to include multiple components. It needs to include tax relief, because you can't win over the illicit market into a legal market if you're pounding them with taxes and you're essentially unduly punishing them because because of the subject matter that they've chosen to rest their livelihoods on, which is the cannabis subject matter. You're going to need to do something about municipalities opting out, because the retail portion of the conversation is so strong, because the fact is the demand is there. And if the retail shops aren't there, there's going to be an illicit market. So that's another critical component of the conversation. You're not going to get anywhere unless you have reform that affects the number of legal retail shops available to persons, and that comes out to municipal buyout. I think Michael's notion of tying the tax revenues from cannabis to participation, I think is brilliant, and it's also, in retrospect, like most brilliant ideas, it's obvious that really needs to happen, right? So that's another critical component to the conversation. And then, of course, ultimately, you do need the enforcement. You do need to understand that it's not only compliant companies that need to meet the regulators. It's not just the companies that are paying their taxes that need to have line items in their budgets relating to compliance. You need to make that across the board. And how do you do that with an illicit company? You enforce the laws that currently exist against them. So all of those components and so many more have to be part of the conversation, and they really have to be enacted holistically. So it's a very tough conversation, and it's going to take real leadership and courage and salespersonship to be able to sell this to the industry at large and to the state and to the voters.
Absolutely. And that's why we're having these conversations. You know, they have to be had and change has to be made. So let's talk about taxes. That is one of the biggest strangulation points for California right now. So Mikey, I'd love to kind of hear it from you, especially again, because you're on the flower side and you guys are getting hit left and right before it even leaves the facility. So tell me a little bit about that. What does it look like for a cultivation company, basically a flower company? What do the taxes look like, and why? Why do they look like that?
Yeah, so we have several layers of taxes. We got a cultivation tax, we got an excise tax, we got the regular sales tax of California, plus certain cities and municipalities have added a gross receipts tax just for no reason on top of that, okay? So what does that do in the end? The cultivation tax, for example, compounds all the way through the supply chain. So when you compare the price point of a legal product on the shelf to its counterparty in an illicit dispensary, which they're everywhere, the products are more or less 50% more expensive, okay? So the demand from the cannabis demand out there is preferring to shop in illicit markets rather than the legal market, simply because of the price sensitivity, right? Products in the illegal market are untested, unsafe. They don't follow protocols. They don't follow safety procedures. Some people have reported fentanyl to be laced in the cannabis. Okay, so what we're creating is horrible buying behaviors and a very, very bad marketplace for the consumers. Okay, so as a cultivator, brand, distributor, manufacturer, kind of in the middle of the supply chain, you know, cultivation tax is very, very problematic. It's worth noting that we're the only agricultural product in the world that's taxed at the farm level. Okay, this doesn't exist in any other industry, and that has to go immediately. Like, it makes absolutely no sense. So that's one of the bigger asks that we have. And then the second one is on the excise tax. It's too much. Right now, we can't compete with the illicit market, right? The mission and the purpose of Proposition 64 was to create a legal, safe environment to consume cannabis and eliminate the illicit market. So we understand that the state needs to make taxes. We all have to win in this process. We're not saying we want to be an industry without taxes forever, but we need to work together to eliminate the illicit market, stabilize the legal one, and have a good, stable foundation to grow from. So in this coalition, we're asking for elimination of the cultivation tax. We're asking for a 3-year grace period on the excise tax, and then a gradual introduction of taxes from there. You don't want to go from 0 to then just put 15 on it, because it's just going to create a shockwave out of the industry. But let's grow into it. What is the right number of taxes? Is it 5%? Is it 8%? Is it 9%? Let's graduate it slowly, and let's figure out where the elasticity is in the consumer base and the price point and make it work. So those are the two things that we're asking for. And given the fact that the state had, and the earlier numbers were a $31 billion surplus. If I remember correctly, I think it went up to like 54, or I saw something recently that was even much higher. So the state has done a really good job. They've got a lot of money, okay? We need to build a great American industry together. You don't need our taxes this year. You don't need it next. Let's go get more taxes together 3 years from now, but you're not gonna have an industry if you don't fix it now.
That's right. And Dashida, for reference, in Oregon, what are the taxes there?
That's an interesting thing. I think it's just at 6%, and it's just one. But I honestly, our excise tax at the local level is 3%. So Michael didn't even go into the local and level excise tax that's also tacked on. In general, this is what I mean by regulation with parity. The parity here is that agricultural small business cap is actually 16 million. More than 75% of the cannabis industry is making revenue at less than 2 million. So we're confusing billions for millions because we have a few large entities, and even then coming from Target, those entities aren't that large either. And I think that the regulation from the beginning, especially in the mature markets, has really put this positioning on the industry that's not true, that somehow it's so much bigger, or this is somehow a sin, and therefore there needs to be a sin tax tacked onto it, like alcohol. But a couple of things don't align. One, like I said, the numbers on where the real size of companies are. The median for revenue is in $270,000. We have a sort of a standard skewed a market where we have a few companies that are skewing the average up, but in reality, the majority of cannabis industry companies are very, very low revenue, and should be not just small business by small business administration in terms of the way it's taxed at the federal level, at a local level, but like micro businesses, to be truthful. And so that's the parity issue. And then the equity issue, the one thing I kind of disagree with what Mike said is that, you know, we're not creating a new illicit market. Illicit market already existed. And there's a ton of diversity, a history. There were things that I did with large MSOs where we polled consumers, and a lot of people are still using their plug, yes, because like Tom said, we have all these dry places, so if you can't buy it, that's going to keep it. But they also, a top reason for continuing to shop the legacy market is trust. They trust it. We still see a number of licensed, compliant companies that are participating, and they're kind of participating in both areas, off the truck, but also in person. And it isn't the best flower. There have been several recalls, not just in the West Coast, but we're seeing that across the country. So in general, I feel we have a lot of efforts that we have to make to deregulate some of this, regulate with a little bit more sensibility, parity to what real small businesses deal with, and recognize that when we are over-regulating, we're actually incentivizing bad actors that can be compliant to do things in the illicit market so that they can still make their numbers and cut their corners. So I do think we're feeding a beast, and California happens to be the largest one right now.
Absolutely. And Matt, in terms of taxes, even though the cultivation folks and distribution, everybody gets taxed at somewhere, the actual customer sees the taxes on the receipt at the store. So I'm sure that is so much sticker shock. So from the retail end of things, how do you guys feel about all of the taxes?
I don't have anything else to say than what everybody else has said. It's just not worth belaboring the point, because it gets back to the frustration that we all have. I mean, the other issue we have at the state level is enforcement that's going on, and the crime waves that's occurring, throughout the state, and in particular, Northern California. There's just zero cooperation, and it adds to the other level of it's like we're being treated like the bad guys here, when the reality is we're supposed to be the ones that are helping this and helping others that have been that have the chance to come over to the regulated side and away from what's hopefully going to be at some point. Like at some point, there's going to have to be that stick's going to have to be used that Mikey was referring to, and the less that's utilized, and quite frankly, the more that it's run away from, which is what's going on right now, the more dangerous this becomes. I mean, it's more than just frightening, and it makes you really, really upset that this is our country that we're living in. This is going on. It's just it's unfathomable. And for those that don't know about it, I encourage you to read up on it and see what's happening in your own backyard. I mean, it should never happen in our country, and it is.
And it's also recently has hit Oakland very hard. A number of storefronts have been broken into with no police presence and no help. So the ones who are paying some of the highest taxes in the city get absolutely no support from,
By the way, and there's been some situations where there's been live ammunition fired multiple times with zero enforcement whatsoever. No law enforcement present whatsoever.
That's frightening. And that's a huge issue just in the industry in general. There are still people, paying with packs of cash and riding around, and there's sales reps getting held up everywhere. So there are so many issues. I mean, we can talk about this forever, but Tom, I'd love to come to you next because we touched upon this a little bit ago, a couple of minutes ago, but it is a well-known secret that a number of licensed companies in California also have an unlicensed side of their company. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on why that is happening. Will that go away? And just kind of get your thoughts on that.
I don't know that it's going to go away before we solve these problems, right? And it's easy enough to say, wow, shame on you, you're double dipping out the back door. But at the same time, the pressures are so intense for the reasons we've just discussed, where you have competitors that aren't paying their taxes, that aren't compliant, that are in the illicit market, and they're charging prices that are a third or even more below the compliant competition. So at that point, you've really got problems, right? So there's a number of different ways in which this affects itself. I'll call it double dipping, where you've got a compliant legal business that's your storefront, and then you're selling out the back door in the illicit market. But also, it's more than just California. At that point, it's also movement across state borders, right? So you've got all this product that's being created here, and it's not necessarily making its way to California consumers, which again affects the market. It's making its way into other states, and it's just a big mess. So from my standpoint, I think that it's almost pointless to talk about addressing the issue of double dipping, as we call it, without addressing these bigger picture issues, because without eliminating the pressures that create the double dipping circumstance, or at least inspire it to a great deal, you're going to have, I think, very little success convincing companies that are double dipping to cut it out.
Absolutely. And either Matt or Mikey or Dashida, would any of you like to speak about that a little further? And it's okay if not.
I mean, it's a reality, right? And I don't think anybody wants to do that, right? I think everybody wants to jump first into the legal market to really participate. And the truth is that on top of the challenges in California, just the capital markets in general for this industry are really tough, right? Investor sentiment from so many years of like challenges and no profits has kind of backed away from this industry, right? We're in the most depressed moment of our capital markets, I think, in the history of this industry. And these businesses, if they can't raise capital, like they're all in the negative, and they have one foot in and one foot out. And it's sad, because that's what the government is incentivizing the people to do. And the only way to fix that is by creating a framework that actually works. But that what's an important message to deliver, and it's been really eye-opening to me, is that there's still a lot of people at the legislature that just think we're making money hand over fist. Like literally, we go into conversations and lobby days, and they're like, what do you mean? You guys in cannabis are all driving Range Rovers and Teslas, and you're like this, and you're like that. And you're like, actually, no, we've never been able to turn a profit. Like, we're all in red. We're all struggling to survive. And that's an important message to deliver. It's like, we're not asking for less taxes so we make more money. We're actually asking for less taxes so we can actually like survive and build an industry that matters.
Absolutely. Thank you for your input on that. So another thing, one of the goals, supposed goals of 64 was to create a more equitable industry. So recently, California State has begun allocating some of the $1.8 billion of cannabis tax revenue that they have collected since January 2018 towards local equity programs for populations and communities impacted by cannabis prohibition and the war on drugs. So in addition to the DCC equity fee waivers, the state's cannabis equity grants program for local jurisdiction has an estimated $35 million available in 2022 to local jurisdictions that have or intend to have a local equity program. So Dashida, I'd love to talk to you about this. We were chatting about this in the prep call, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Do you think it's actually going to happen? Have you seen any successful programs that have worked thus far in another state?
For sure. Well, first, a couple of things that I just have to continue to stress is what Michael said, is that there's this belief that cannabis is making money hand over foot, cannabis businesses, but the people that are making money hand over foot is the government, right? So you mentioned $1.8 billion, again, not confusing millions, 4 billion. So this is $1 billion new revenue source for the state that is already boasting a surplus. And yet, of this amount, you only talked about 34 million with an M that's now being used to support industry growth from an equity standpoint. There has been some success. We definitely have to always shout out Oakland and their ingenious sort of approach to equity and using this money, including being able to fund grants that help individuals buy buildings, literally for shared resources and shared use. LA just launched their own social equity and entrepreneur development program from their millions that they received. So it's interesting. The state collects it at the state level, but then it's on each municipality to actually utilize it in a significant way. And so I'm calling out the areas, San Francisco may be another, where we're seeing some movement. I have to shout out the city of Portland because we're also using cannabis tax revenue to reinvest in community, but our fund isn't for cannabis businesses specifically. I believe there should be one, but our fund is specifically for the community organizations that have been serving the most harmed communities for years, under-resourced and underserved. And those are things that are missing from Cali. So I do think while Cali is definitely leading the way on a local level on ways we can be innovative with the cannabis tax revenue, let's not confuse millions for billions. I'm not that person. I want to call it out. It's a very small number when we look at the total tax amount that has been allocated. And so there needs to be more. It's also a small number, like I said, compared to the 89 million or numbers there are that are being used for enforcement. And I think we need to balance that a bit more. And then we're not seeing total state participation, right? We're seeing it in local areas that are very specific. And so it does draw more equity in those particular areas. But if you head down to San Diego, it's still, pretty white, male led, and there aren't very many diverse businesses there. So I think Cali is attempting to lead us in some ways with the efforts on the ground at the local level, but it's still missing it at a state level. So my hope is if there's going to be, some mandate to participate or force municipalities to participate, that they are also forced to do so with the equity-centered lens in the regulation.
Absolutely. And there's actually a question in the chat that is relevant to this. So are there any specific current, relevant, and successful movements within the state that can be tapped into to help us take these to local cities and municipalities that are limiting the supply? I have not heard of any. I mean, I think it's a lot of grassroots efforts in each specific municipality. Anybody want to talk about just local movements? And there's a silence, probably because there is not that much movement, and that's okay. So let's move on to the next thing. So Matt, I'd love to talk to you kind of about your crystal ball about retail in California. You just had a successful why don't you tell it? I don't want to mix it up. So you're a big guy now. So tell us what's going on with Harborside.
I don't know about that. we announced last in November the merger of Harborside and Urban Leaf and Loud Pack. It's going to close at the end of March. Obviously, it gives, which will now be called State House Holdings. State House will now be fully vertically integrated, which we were already, but not to the extent that we are now. Adding more production, more manufacturing, and obviously more retail in Southern California with the Urban Leaf assets. To the point that we've been making here, we feel like the best way to play this game right now, given the rules of engagement, are to be as big as we can, and in terms of getting access to capital, that's one of the ways we have to do that. And again, it's not for everybody's not going to like to hear that, but the reality is that the only way we were going to survive for the long game is to build scale this way. And we feel like that the steps we've taken to do that, the management team we've put together with Ed Schmaltz as the new CEO, we feel like we're poised to make our mark in a big way in California. And but we still have to deal with the inefficiencies that we've all talked about here too, no matter how big we are. So it doesn't make it any easier. We just feel like the only way to sustain, at least from our business model, was to get as big as we can, and we'll continue to do that going forward.
And so that's kind of a way of saying that you do have hope for the California industry, though. Right?
Look, I think we've been poo-pooing California for the past 30 minutes, but the reality is, as I said before, it's still the largest cannabis market in the world. And at some point, the rubber's going to hit the road to where things will have to change. I mean, I'm encouraged by the grassroots movements. I'm encouraged by I'm encouraged by what Gavin Newsom has said. We'll just see what happens. It's probably not going to happen overnight, but I think there are enough movements underway to where there could effectuate some change, and hopefully sooner rather than later.
Great, thank you. And Tom, what have you been seeing just in terms of like consolidation in California, the moves that companies are making? You work with so many different cannabis companies across, the United States. So California specifically, what are you seeing? What do you think the future of, consolidation looks like?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is a bit of hesitancy. Whenever you're talking to MSOs these days, California, there's always a pause before you start talking about California. So the pause is a function of obviously the opportunity. It is and has been and will remain for some time the largest market in the world for cannabis, and that's going to be the state of things for a while. At the same time, all the problems that we discussed here are prominent on folks' minds. So what we've seen is a lot of folks saying, we'll wait, or we're going to pass on California. And that's a bit surprising. Wouldn't have expected to see the decision being made so quickly and in such stark terms as we've seen it over the past probably 18 months, where people are just like, we're going to pass on California, let's talk about other states. And so that's disappointing, right? We do work all over the world, so fine with us from a legal standpoint, but as a California resident, kind of disappointing. I think something else that we're seeing is there is a notion, I think, that's the MSO side of things, but also I think that companies in general, particularly just under the MSO level, where they're larger companies, but not quite as large as some of the biggest players in the global space, they're recognizing that the window may be limited here to make a bit more progress before they start thinking about exiting, whether voluntarily or almost involuntarily, once as the conversation continues to pick up. So I guess what we're seeing also, aside from this hesitancy at actually growing a presence in California, whether existing or non-existing current presence, is this notion that people need to get a move on as far as joining forces here, merging in the state house manner, right? Where they're saying, okay, we need to just play on a bigger level here if we're going to have a bigger say on what the industry is going to look like tomorrow. So we're seeing that as well.
Right. I think a lot of companies feel siloed just in general, just being in the cannabis industry, you feel alone sometimes. So I think, also at the basic level, joining forces and just feeling like there's, some more collaboration within your own company on a higher level, that's definitely part of it. And someone dropped this in the chat, and I'd love, Mikey, you responded to, but James Young wrote, "We're permitted cultivators from Humboldt and barely surviving. Is there anything to be optimistic about?" And Mikey, your response was great, but do you mind sharing it with the audience as well? Because I think a lot of entrepreneurs, especially in California right now, even if they have been in the space for a while, are feeling the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to get involved in operating the space and deal with the madness, okay, you have to be a long-term believer in the category, right? You have to be long the category. You have to believe that cannabis has been here for millennia, that it is a huge industry, and that demand is not disappearing, right? And that's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right? For all of us, right? We're here today with a shitty market, and there's a future market here that we're all going to get to, right? And the pipes connecting this right now, called regulations, are fundamentally broken, right? Like the path is blocked, like we cannot access that real market. So if you're long the category and you're willing to go through the troubles, I think what you have to find a way is to survive, is to hold on. Like thinking right now to grow, to scale, to be profitable, to expand in California, like it's not possible. It literally is not possible. So sometimes you have to go in the other direction and be nimble and be small and find opportunities. I think what Matt described that he did with Harborside, I thought that was brilliant. I'm sure that was incredibly difficult, incredibly hard work, but all great things are horribly difficult, right? But what they've been able to do is find like-minded people to come together to the same values, the same mission, and find ways to be more efficient, find ways to lean on each other. So find ways to lean on other people, find ways to be more effective, more efficient, and just hold on, right? And if you don't believe that the category exists in the long term, then, go into another industry.
Absolutely. And there will always be a need for Humboldt flower. So
exactly.
A good flower will never go out of style. So keep trucking on that. So another promise that Newsom has made recently is a focus on improved testing standards for the state. And someone actually dropped a question about this as well. So Peter Goodwin said the DCC says California needs approximately 100 testing laboratories, yet there are only about 40 in operation. What are the panelists' opinions regarding investing in or starting a cannabis testing lab in general? So who would like to start?
Well,
everyone's like, yes.
I was just going to say, from taking my Harborside hat off and putting my Entourage Effect Capital hat on from an investment standpoint, that's exactly why we haven't been able to get our arms around making an investment in the testing space, is because it would be nice, obviously, if there was a much more blanketed way to make testing uniform, not just in California alone, but also across all the legalized states, to where you could truly have a company that could cross state lines and have effective mechanisms and consistent mechanisms by which cannabis is tested uniformly across the legalized landscape. But because as an ancillary company, you would think they should be able to do that. However, that hasn't been the case. And this is another example of how just backwards the regulatory aspects are in the state. We've been unable to find the right deal, and won't until, and may not ever, but it'll take some type of change agent like you referred to, Sarah, with what Newsom said, to give us any interest in pursuing it.
Thanks, Matt. And Dashida?
Well, I wrote about this in my workbook, How to Succeed in the Cannabis Industry. I'm a molecular biologist, so when I think about the simplicity of the testing components needed in the supply chain to make it really functional, it's very simple. We're talking about, I feel like, second year type of college level in terms of just the instrumentation and things that I learned. And so I do think that this is one of those white space where everybody's running to one room in our house, and this is the emptiest room, more so from a lack of knowledge knowledge and maybe not enough people transitioning from sort of the biomedical and or molecular or chemistry space into cannabis industry. But I think this goes back to what Michael kind of said. I feel the full success of the industry is, yes, getting bigger, but not necessarily the way that Matt described getting bigger. We have to work in coalition. And I've been recommending this throughout every market. It's why Dr. Rachel and I are part of a co-founding group of the Cannabis Health Equity movement, because we saw that we're not necessarily able to do mergers and acquisition on such a large way, but there are effective things when you work in coalition with people who have expertise, seed to solution expertise, regulatory law, medicine, and all are like-minded in the mission. And so I did want to just shout out that there's the California Cannabis Equity Alliance. It's another coalition that is working to try to, again, get the state to do the right thing related to equity, and also starting to understand what those business dynamics are as well. So I think we do have to get bigger. It might not be in a merger or an acquisition, but it's definitely bigger in mission, in mindset shift. This is a real medicinal product that it always has been. So last thing I'll say is, coming from Target, it comes down to the consumer demand and consumer needs. And someone put something in there about CPG, and that's exactly the case. I think a lot of big companies have come in and not realizing that this is a consumer product and treating it as such. It's not you just, provide weed and people are going to buy it. Most people who are doing this a long time are connoisseurs, and they're going to be the ones leading the influence on what is successful and adopted as this continues.
Great, thank you. Tom, you want to add to that?
Well, I think it was very well stated. We certainly need more labs out there to keep the things flowing in the legal market. At the same time, we also need, I think, a consistency of standard, right? And so I think the lack of consistency has really been confusing for the marketplace and and I think especially for producers, right? So a consistency of standard is the other thing that we really need in addition to volume.
Absolutely. And also general education to consumers, because a lot of them are now shopping around for high THCs when that's not necessarily the only thing that gets you very high. So I've heard of a lot of companies lab shopping to get the higher THC on their products. So all of these are huge issues. We're coming up on the hour, so I'd love to just have each of you kind of give your parting thoughts, either hope for California or what's coming up in the next couple of months, or any call to actions that you guys would like. And we'll just go down the line. So Tom, I'm actually going to start with you.
Sure. So I'll use a word then that I think could be instructive and inspirational in this conversation, and I mean all of it, which is the word trust. Ultimately, building brands is about building a trust between the producers and the consumers, right? And I think the state of California and the municipalities under that can get involved in that conversation. And I would look at it as a joint effort, almost like a team licensed operator, right? And it's all the licensed operators. And they want to have a conversation of trust with all the consumers out there. And that's as opposed to the illicit market, which doesn't have that conversation of trust. They're not really focused on it. And I think if we think in those terms, I think if regulators and enforcers think in those terms, we can finally get somewhere. So let's take it to standards of testing, for instance. That facilitates a conversation of trust, right? What we need to do is we need to draw a very broad line between the legal market and the illicit market, right? And that broad line needs to be visible to the consumer, so they can say, listen, yes, I can pay cheaper prices to get my weed, but do I really want to take a chance on having fentanyl? So if we're going to have that conversation in earnest, then we need to talk about trust that brands build between consumers and the role that regulators can play and enforcers can play facilitating that conversation of trust. And then if we have that conversation of trust in earnest, where the legal market is actually making the point and driving it home, saying that, listen, you're going to pay more, but it's worth it because we have standardized testing. And the fact is that if you're holding a product and it's from the legal market, you're pretty safe. And that's an awesome statement. That's not a statement that we're really making in earnest as a unified industry today. So for me, I would start using the word trust, and I mean trust between brands and consumers more often. And I'd use that as a leverage point to distinguish between the illicit market and the legal market. And I also think that could inspire a cohesive, holistic approach to regulatory reform in the state.
I love that. Thank you, Tom. And
Sure.
Dashida, parting words from you.
I think I said mine. I think at the end of the day, it comes down to the consumer, and we need to regulate with parity and equity in mind, which means it has to be sensible. So some of what I'd like to see the state do is try to figure out the pathways to walk back some of the over-regulation that exists. And I think definitely the coalition of business owners and individuals within the state and external, right? As New York starts to turn on, people are starting to say, hey, why aren't we doing things a little bit differently? And I think the competitive nature of state to state, we need to use that to our advantage in each one of these markets for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Matt, parting words from you.
I think that I want to go back to what I said about how this is frustrating, but I do want to reiterate that, we wouldn't be, doing things like what we did with State House or putting, more of our capital to work in California if we didn't think it was still a tremendous opportunity. So I think if we can all, band together as a legalized market to express our frustration at the state level, then we've got a fighting chance of creating change. And this is, it's impacting the biggest companies down to the smallest companies. And it's just, we've got to get more serious about the groundswell of support to make these change occur. And so I know we're going to try to get more involved. We work very, very closely with our municipalities. It's very difficult in Northern California with all the issues that are going on up there, but we're doing the best we can to work with them. We want to, improve that at the state level as well.
Thank you, Matt. And Mikey, let's end with you.
Yeah. So I think hope is an important part of the human condition, and yes, we all have to hope for California, but I think we all have to more so now work for California. And I think as operators, we are frustrated, we are tired, we're burnt out, we are here at our last resort. But this is the moment where we have to push harder, where we have to stay focused, where we have to work with the legislature, where we have to work with each other. But we have to be willing to be bold to get the changes that we need. Right now, what we're doing with our group is that we are willing to create what we call intolerable tension at the state. And there are people marching there today. We're going to be marching on the 26th. And every month we're going to get louder. Our movement's going to get bigger to the point that they're going to have to listen. We're raising a white flag. We want to work with Governor Newsom. We want to work with the legislature. This is not a revolution or a fight, but it is dire. And I think at this point, and I can't remember the person who asked the question, I think it was James earlier, and he just wrote again, let's keep pushing because we can make it happen. We just cannot give up.
Thank you so much. And it's true, no taxation without representation. And I've recently heard a word, cooperation. What is it? It's a mixture of collaboration and competition, whatever that was, but that's what it is, because this is, yes, co-opetition. Thank you, Dashida. I was like, someone please. But it's true, because that's what we all need to do. Even if we're doing the same thing, even if we're producing the same product, we all have to be collaborative, because it's the only way that this is going to succeed nationally, not even in California. This isn't, we're talking about California today because it's such an issue right now in such a big state that on the outside seems successful. So if we can't make it work here, how the hell are we going to make it work anywhere else? So I just wanted to thank everyone, Mikey, Matt, Dashida, Tom. Your expertise and everything you said was so invaluable. I really appreciate your time. I'm sure there's going to be a part 2 to this conversation, and hopefully we'll have some movement and better news within the next few months. So with that, I'm going to wrap up the program. I want to thank everybody who is in attendance today. And just a reminder that on Thursday, January 27th, we will have another panel discussion about mergers and acquisitions featuring Heather Malloy, Nancy Whiteman from Wanted Brands, Ice Miller Law Firm, and Jamie Mendola from Air Wellness. And again, just a reminder to check out our Women's Inclusion Network. You can find that information on arcviewgroup.com/win. And with that, I want to say thank you. Have a great day, and we'll see you on another program soon.